This is Edge of the Box, a podcast brought to you by WhoScored.com.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Edge of the Box, a podcast brought to you by WhoScored. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, and with me are football writer and author Jonathan Wilson and WhoScored.com's very own Martin Laurence. In this weekly podcast, we'll be previewing all of the upcoming weekend's Premier League action, and we mean all of it, and discussing the players that are in the best form heading into game week 10 by using the WhoScored Power Rankings. To start, though, everyone was obviously saddened to learn of the passing of footballing legend Diego Maradona at 60 years of age. Jonathan, someone you know a lot about and like to talk about, just what are your memories of this footballing god?
I mean, how do you even begin to sum him up? I think the thing with Maradona that people have to understand, and maybe to people who aren't that familiar with Argentina, this is something that's harder to get across. But in his career, he only actually won 3 league titles. He 2 domestic cups, UEFA Cup and the World Cup, the big one, which for some of his talent doesn't seem like that much. But he represented way, way more for Argentina. This whole mass of people who've got very, very little in common. And so there's this nationwide discussion on what is it to be Argentinian. And one of the very few things they can agree on is they all want Argentina to win football matches. They all want this team in the blue and white striped shirt to win games. And so the way that team plays then becomes critical to self-identity. The Argentinian game is about close control, it's about technique, and it's about streetwiseness. It's about looking after yourself in these mass games in small spaces where you don't have a teacher blowing the whistle when things get out of hand, where you've got to look after yourself. And Boacotto, the editor of El Gráfico, the great football magazine, he wrote a very famous piece in 1928 when he said, if we were to erect a statue to the spirit of Argentinian football, it would be a pibe, an urchin, a kid from the street, with holes in his shirt. And you read this description, and it talks of the mischievous glint in his eye, and his legs ready for the dribble. And if you gave somebody that description and didn't tell them who it was, didn't give them any context, said, who's that? 100% of people would say, that's Maradona. And this is 50 years, or 49 years, before he makes his international debut. So when he arrives, and when age 16, he starts playing in the league, and he's brilliant, and he makes his international debut, even before the World Cup in 78, which he ended up not being selected for. And then he leads them to the Under-20 World Cup in 1979. It's as if this is a messiah whose coming has been foretold. And then he fulfills that prophecy by winning the World Cup in 86. So that's why he has this hold on Argentina. He is an embodiment of the spirit of Argentina. And then he's a brilliant player with his turbulent life story, with all the fallibility. He has this transcendence. He shows that from the incredible darkness of his personal life can come these moments of beauty. And his genius somehow, being so obviously hard wrought, being such a struggle for him, is, I think, somehow more relatable than the relentless excellence of a Messi.
Some lovely stuff that you've told us there, and obviously we were all sorry to hear that Diego passed yesterday, and we wish all the best to his family and friends. Martin, from Who Scored, this is the first Who Scored podcast. We're obviously going to be focusing heavily on the Premier League, and we are going to be the podcast that focuses on every Premier League game every week. The season is actually a quarter old already, which seems mad. It doesn't feel like it's been going that long, the new season, although in some ways as well, it's rolled into one off the back of lockdown. Just wanted to get your guys' feel, and I'll start with you, Martin. What's been the most enjoyable aspect of the Premier League for you so far this season?
I think the randomness of it has been enjoyable, but also much needed after last season. I think the way Liverpool sort of cantered to the title last season, we've needed this start to the season where it's been very unpredictable. I think there's been 5 or 6 teams that have topped the league, even if it was only for like an hour or whatever it was when Southampton did it and stuff like that. But I think that's definitely been needed this season, just because last season was a bit of a slog in a way. Not for Liverpool, I'm sure they enjoyed it. But for the rest of the league, certainly as a Villa fan, it was a slog. But
sure.
But yeah, the randomness of this season's been really enjoyable, I think. And while there's been no fans, and that's been a real sort of downside, what that has brought about in terms of the basically being no home advantage anymore, and it just messing with the predictability of the league a little bit, has been enjoyable to watch, certainly, I think.
Yeah, what about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I wish the randomness had come about in different circumstances. It's obviously not good that players are going down with soft tissue injuries all the time. But I think But the sort of a positive side of that is there's a whole load of teams with either interesting players or interesting managers doing interesting things. So whereas we sort of got locked into this thing of, there's a 4 or maybe a 6 at the top, and that's kind of where the interest ends. We're seeing Leicester, Villa, Leeds, Everton, Southampton, Wolves, who all, you sort of think on their day, they could beat anybody. And so you do have that unpredictability. And also the flip side of that, the fact that some of the top teams are having their problems. Liverpool with the injuries, although they seem to have got over that. Manchester City, there's a whole range of issues there, I think. Arsenal are sort of struggling to an identity. Tottenham overperforming, if you like. So it almost feels like every game there's some kind of narrative story there that as a journalist, the last thing you want is to go to a game, big team beats smaller team, it's 3-0, nothing happens. What on earth do I write about? Well, that hasn't really happened this season. This season, it feels like the vast majority of games, there's been something to get your teeth into.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an unbelievable season so far. I mean, if anyone cares what my most enjoyable aspect so far is, it's actually the re-emergence of Mourinho. I think just before the season started, I watched the Amazon documentary and I was all in on Jose. And it's just great to see him back at the top of the league now. And I'm just really enjoying seeing the re-emergence of him after he's had a couple of suspect spells in the Premier League, really. So to see him back and looks to me like he's firing on all cylinders, it's really great to see. So next question for you guys. Jonathan, I'll start with you this time. The team you've been most impressed by so far?
Oh, that's interesting because I guess, who is it?
It's a difficult question.
Yeah, because if you asked me sort of 2 or 3 weeks ago, I'd probably have said Villa or I'd have said Everton, but they've obviously had their little wobble. Southampton in some ways, but it's probably Tottenham. You're probably right. Seeing I mean, it's not quite a strike pairing because the 2 of the 3, but seeing how well the Son and Kane partnership works. But yeah, seeing Mourinho back, seeing him with that swagger, and you sort of, I went through a long spell, both when he was at Real Madrid and then second time at Chelsea and then United. I was sort of thinking, I can't quite remember why it was I liked this guy. What was it I was enjoying him? But the charm's back. He's funny again. And his sort of adoption of Instagram is one of the great little side issues of the season. I assume he kind of knows he's not really doing it right.
Yeah, I hope so.
If he, there's sort of this deadpan absurdism to it. If he's genuinely setting up and posing these pictures of him eating popcorn, well, that's really weird, and I've got a problem with that. If he's doing that to slightly sort of undermine the form and sort of suggest that I'm better than this really, but let's sort of play along with it, then I'm very much in favour of that.
I think he used the word randoms, which I really liked. I just found that quite funny, quite relatable, which is nice, which is what you want, I think, from these sort of characters. And like you say, it's just a great personality, isn't he, and a great character.
He kind of reminds me of my dad using Instagram, and that he thinks he's doing it right, and he thinks he's really successful. And although, to be fair, there's no chance of my dad breaking the internet or things like that. Jose's posts are very, very popular. But who's the team you're most impressed by, Martin?
I'm going to go with Leicester, and not because of the way that they've played, because they've I think in a way the way that they've adapted is the most impressive thing. So I think if you look at their top 5 players from last season, I think this translates into our ratings. Funnily enough, I think it's Ricardo Pereira, Soyuncu, Ndidi, Maddison, and Vardy, and they've all missed. Vardy less so; he's missed 1 or 2 games, but they've all missed big chunks of the season. And for them to negotiate a tough fixture list with that number of injuries, and I know a lot of people are talking about Liverpool at the moment, but Leicester's has been horrific. Yeah, and to have negotiated that and beaten City and beaten Arsenal, and obviously it seems like a sort of poor timing to say this was in my mind ahead of the weekend when they got sort of brought back down to earth by Liverpool. So it's not the best timing in that sense. But to be still sort of in a challenge for a top 4, not for a top 4 place, obviously this early in the season, but to show signs that they will compete again despite having that many injuries. And I think Ndidi, Soyuncu, and Pereira are all sort of coming back to fitness. So once they're back, I think they'll be a really, really good team to watch again and a threat to all teams in the league, really.
Yeah, and Jonathan, when you take into account Leicester's injuries as well, what happened to them at the back end of last season with their real tail off. They looked certainties for the Champions League at one point, but they ended up falling away at the last. Just how impressed have you been with them?
Yeah, I sort of quite reassured as well, because I sort of had the sense last season, I was going to say one of my pet hates, but that's not quite true. One of the things that fascinates me is how we often judge a season not as a whole, but how it ends. So if Leicester got their points, if Leicester season had been the other way around, would have been, what a brilliant end of the season, Leicester going into the new season with great momentum. But I'm not sure how many games you should look at when you're considering something, because they clearly did have that big drop off after Christmas. They lost that game to Liverpool on Boxing Day, and then there was this plummet, and partly that was injury conditioned. Indeed, he got the knee injury. I think he missed 5 games, but he wasn't quite right for the rest of the season. Pereira was out for the last 2 or 3 months. Maddison missed for the last 6 weeks or 2 months, the last 8 games or so anyway. And so I sort of had this sense that actually Leicester are okay. The season as a whole is what we should look at here. We shouldn't be looking at momentum. We shouldn't be looking at the downward spiral. But at the same time, I'm also aware that often when you're in those downward spirals, they feel impossible to get out of. So I'm very glad that they have started the season so well, despite all the absences, because it does sort of reaffirm my faith that there is something to football beyond just momentum. There is sort of an intrinsic quality there that I sort of felt Leicester had shown for most of last season. Yeah,
they've certainly done well to reset and go again. And just to finish this quarter of the season review, I've got a few players in my mind here, but Martin, who's the signing so far that you've been most impressed by?
I think there's obviously a lot that you could pick out from some of the more obvious teams that have really improved, that have so clearly improved. I think if you look at sort of Tottenham, Chelsea, Villa, Everton, those were probably the teams that you thought would improve the most this season, based on their transfers, and that has sort of panned out. But I think Gabriel at Arsenal has really, really impressed me in terms of the step up from Liga. And on that note as well, Wesley Fofana at Leicester. I think
he was on my list.
Yeah, I think it's just the first game I watched him, obviously his debut against Villa. I looked at him because I'd never seen him play, and he looked quite wiry, not particularly tall. I'd heard that he was fast and he was good on the ball, but this was after Villa had just smashed Liverpool 7-2, and Ollie Watkins had basically bullied Joe Gomez into a substitution, and Fofana basically pocketed Ollie Watkins for that game on his debut. Yeah. And he was really strong, he was really fast, good in the air, really good on the ball, and I've just been super impressed with his consistency and his composure to step up at his age from Ligue 1. He's been the one that's probably impressed me the most, just ahead of Gabriel, who's been outstanding for the most part as well.
Yeah, you're obviously keen on centre-backs there with the 2 centre-back choices. Then, Jonathan, who are you going to go for?
Well, in some ways, it's quite a boring answer, but a player who I sort of knew was a good player, but I felt the circumstances he was going into were very difficult, and I sort of wasn't at all convinced it would work, is Diego Jota. I sort of thought Liverpool had a big problem coming there with that front three, who was so good together. It's very hard to leave any one of the three out, and they're all 29, so they're slowly reaching the edge of a cliff together, and so I sort of had a sense that something Liverpool needed to do was to not freshen that up, but at least look to a future beyond those three, to reducing their workload and considering what a future might look like. And Jota, I knew he was a good player. I'd seen him at Wolves. I've been impressed by him. But the start he's had at Liverpool, I think has been remarkable. And that I think is hugely positive for Liverpool, not just this season, but looking ahead to how Klopp may rebuild the team for 3 or 4 years' time.
Is it a bit Sir Alex Ferguson like that? Because how he used to refresh the team every few years. Sometimes you think he didn't need to, and he'd sell someone that would surprise you and bring someone through. Do you think, like you say, that's the first sign of that happening at Liverpool now, where they're going to need to freshen it up?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it's a really difficult skill to refresh a team as you're going along. So, I mean, when Guardiola signed his new contract, I sort of thought back and thought, how many managers have ever, in English football, built one team, taken it apart and rebuilt it? And Ferguson did it 3 times. Busby did it 3 times. Mourinho, with an asterisk, because he obviously had his time away from Chelsea, but won the league there in 2 very different spells. But after that, it's a very short list. Shankly did it. Paisley did it. Harry Catterick did it at Everton. And that's... I don't think I've missed anybody obvious there, have I? But that's... Wenger did it. That's pretty much it. Yeah, Don Revie couldn't do it at Leeds. The reason Revie left Leeds to go to England, well, I mean, partly was the money, but partly was the team he put together, they'd grown up together, was getting old together, and he couldn't face dismantling it. Shankly, I think, delayed the dismantling of his first Liverpool for far too long. It was only when they had that humiliation at Watford that he was forced to do it. But he found that very, very difficult. So the capacity to do that suggests a real ruthlessness and a real strategic genius, which I think is what marked Ferguson out as a great. And Klopp is one of those managers who I think is not looking at this as a 3 or 4 season job, looking at it as a career job, as a decade, 2 decades, sure. Who knows? And I think that this is the first sign that he is equipped to do something that a lot of managers in the past have found very, very difficult.
Yeah, I guess you'd second that, Martin.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, can I change my answer to Jota? But no, yeah, very true. I think it was definitely needed. I think there's obviously so much faith within Liverpool in Firmino, and rightly so. He's a sensational player at what he does, but the tail off in his sort of conversion rate and his goal scoring is a concern. It has to be a concern. It's pretty awful. Again, this isn't good timing after scoring at the weekend, but yeah, there will have been a concern there. So the way that Jota has hit the ground running in terms of his goals, which I just didn't see coming, in terms of the consistency of his level in front of goal. I don't think we saw that at Wolves. Obviously, completely different set of circumstances, but the way that he's adapted and fit in at Liverpool so seamlessly has been super impressive, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, the encouraging thing for me here is that I had 3 players down on my list, and you've both named 2 of them, so that's a great start for me. Højbjerg was the other one at Tottenham. I think he's made a real difference in the middle of the park, and we're going to move on to Chelsea versus Tottenham now, which is obviously the biggest game coming up at the weekend. Now, Jonathan, I don't know whether you actually know this is coming, but we've got a couple of trivia questions for you.
I saw trivia questions on the running order. I'm slightly scared by it, but obviously I don't know what they are. So,
okay.
Just can you bear in mind, I'm very, very tired. I've had 3 hours sleep. I've been writing about Maradona for 17 and a half hours. So I may not be quite at my peak. I'm in the red zone. Okay,
in the red zone. Nice. I mean, there's 2 questions here. I will say it's Martin that's come up with these, not me. So if you don't like them, don't blame me. Blame Martin. So I've got to make sure I word these questions correctly. So the first one is, in the Chelsea and Tottenham fixture, who has scored the most goals in the history of the Premier League? I've been told to make you think about this through the show and save it till the end, which seems a bit harsh because we're obviously going to be talking about other things and you're going to have this in the back of your mind. The second part of the question is, which player currently playing for Spurs or Chelsea has scored the most goals in this fixture? And I will tell you, I actually got this one right amazingly when Martin...
pressure's on now.
Yeah, I've put the pressure on you big time there. So, yeah, Chelsea, Tottenham, Stamford Bridge. Well, I'll go to Martin first while you have a little think, Jonathan. Just what's changed with Chelsea? Because at the start of the season, they could not defend to save their lives. And suddenly now they look so solid. They look like they love defending and they want clean sheets. They look hungry for them.
Yeah, I think the sort of the composure that some of the players, and obviously Thiago Silva probably the most apt there, has brought to that defence, and the way that sort of resonates along the back 4, and certainly with Kurt Zouma, who I think stepped up another level and been brilliant in the most part. I think that's been massive, and obviously there were questions about whether Thiago Silva could do it in the Premier League at 36, and it didn't start well, obviously. But to recover from that, he's recovered from that completely. Put that behind him, and he's been excellent. And obviously the clean sheets speak for themselves. The goals speak for themselves going forward. On the clean sheets matter, obviously Mondi's come in, and I think he's been. I just want to caveat this by saying I think he's been the perfect signing for Chelsea, in that he's just a reliable, or touchwood so far, he's been a very reliable goalkeeper. I think there's been a bit of sort of clamour or hype around him from Chelsea fans, and I know Twitter's not the sort of platform for reasoned debate most of the time, but I've seen a lot about him being the best goalkeeper in the world at the moment and stuff. I think we need to calm down a little bit on that. I think he's had really good protection, which has been really important. And I think Chelsea fans are reacting to the fact that he's not Kepa. And essentially, they've got a competent goalkeeper in goal, and they're now like, whoa, he just made a save. and that's sort of really impressive. I think if you look at the games individually, he's not really had many big saves to make. I know he made the one in midweek that a lot of people were really impressed by, a good reflex save, but again, to my mind, got a little bit lucky with it. Probably got overhyped a little bit. But the saves he's made in general have probably been routine. I think if you look through the clean sheets that he's kept, I think it's Palace didn't have a save to make, Burnley didn't have a save to make, Newcastle at the weekend he made one save from a shot that was probably going off target. So if you don't face shots on target, you're going to keep a clean sheet. I think what the important thing is the confidence that he's brought to that back four, to have someone who is reliable. And I think, like I said, that's why I think he has been a perfect signing for them. I think where the Kepa signing was such an unmitigated disaster, it has to go down as one of the worst of all time when you're looking at a goalkeeper who's the worst statistically in Europe, and he cost more than any goalkeeper in history. That's a big problem. So to go from that, they just needed someone steady, and that's what Mendy's been, and they haven't broken the bank for him, and it's just worked perfectly. So he deserves a lot of credit, but I just think some people might need to calm down on his level just yet.
Jonathan, do you think it's a little bit reminiscent of when Arsenal signed Cech off the back of a load of dodgy goalkeepers, and every time he caught the ball, there was these cheers like he was doing something out of the ordinary? Do you think Mendy is just benefiting simply from not being Kepa at the moment? Yeah,
to an extent. I mean, I'm sort of slightly in two minds about Chelsea, because they clearly have been really good recently. I think the last 8 games, I mean, that in 2 goals. I think Chilwell's fit in really well as well, and the fact he's got a couple of goals getting forward from left back, which was something I wasn't sure that he could replicate, that Marcos Alonso at his best had given them. But the one thing I would say, and I also think their midfield looks better the last 3 league games when Kante's played at the back of midfield rather than Jorginho. That just always seemed to me the more natural thing to do. Yeah. But the one doubt I have, I'd been very critical of Chelsea defensively beginning of this season and all last season, and their stats for goals conceded from cross-set plays and from counter-attacks were among the worst in the league. And that had been a feature of Lampard's derby as well. So I had that big concern over Lampard. Now, maybe he himself has improved, and certainly the personnel have improved. But in that last 8 games, if you look at who they've played, they haven't really been tested. So they played Sevilla first, which is probably the hardest of the games. But Sevilla at the time were in the middle of a run of 7 games, which they only scored 4 goals. So they're in a period when they were struggling to score. They then played Manchester United, which is that game where essentially each team sat in their own half and looked at the ball on the halfway line, and nobody went forward at all. And then they've played Rennes twice, and one of those games Rennes had 10 men for half a game. Krasnodar, Sheffield United, Newcastle, and Burnley. So those are not teams you'd expect to test them. Now, obviously, you can only beat the teams you're playing, and 2 draws and 6 wins from those games is very impressive. But this game on Sunday against Tottenham, who are very good at counter-attacking, will be a much tougher test. And then they've got Leeds, Everton, and Wolves for 3 games after that, which will also be much tougher tests than they faced in the last month. And the real sort of thing that set alarm bells ringing was the goal that Rennes scored on Tuesday night, which was a very simple corner and a free header. And that suggests that problem against cross-set plays maybe hasn't quite been resolved just by bringing in Thiago Silva.
Do you think, in a way, playing Spurs might suit them if Jose sets up in a similar way to which he did against Man City, where he'll let the team play on the front foot? Jose, he'll let Chelsea play football, and then he'll look to pick them off on the break. Do you think that might suit them defensively in some ways?
No, I think that's the thing they're really bad at. I think when they're encouraged to take the game to the opposition, that's where they struggle. Having said that, in head-to-head matchups between Lampard and Jose, I think they've met 4 times. 2 of those have been in the League Cup and have gone to penalties, and Lampard's won the other 2. So last season he didn't have a problem with that in a season when they did have a problem conceding goals on the counter. Yeah. But this is a different Tottenham. This is a different Jose, and Kane and Son in that kind of form, plus whether it's Bale, whether it's Bergwijn, whether it's Lucas Moura, on the break, that is a serious test, a much more serious test than they faced in those 8 games.
Sure. Martin, we talked about the defensive solidarity now, and it seems that Lampard likes to rotate at the moment as well. He's using his squad to the absolute full. I mean, so he should really. They've got such a big squad nowadays. But if Thiago Silva comes out, Rudiger came in for a game last week. he seems to have got that defending down with a bit of chopping and changing as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of what's been talked about has been sort of managing the egos and managing the personalities in the dressing room because they're not all going to get to play. So I think the way that Rudiger played against Newcastle, but again, I would call on what Jonathan said in terms of the opposition, because if you watch that game, Newcastle were absolutely pitiful. They were, it sounds harsh, but they were a bit of a disgrace in the first half. They didn't bother passing the ball. They didn't even try. So he came in and was solid, but against very little. So I think that needs a bit more time to see whether in future, if they're missing Thiago Silva, can they cope in the same way? Obviously, that's a big question. Because I think, just like I said before, I think the calmness that he brings alongside Zuma, who can be erratic, has been a massive plus. And Rudiger doesn't have that. Christensen probably has that a bit more to a degree, but I don't think he seems to be in favour. So, yeah, I think there's still questions to be answered based on the opposition that they're going to face, and I think that's why this game at the weekend is a really interesting one.
Yeah, and Jonathan, Chelsea were obviously one of the busiest teams in the transfer window, but Spurs' business, I think, has actually been very good as well. I think if you think of Bale has been the big name signing that they bought in the transfer window, but he hasn't really made a real impact yet. But you look at someone like Reguilon at left back, who I think has been really good, and Højbjerg in the centre of the park as well, who's really Mourinho's lieutenant in there. Do you think Tottenham have an argument for having done the better business and doing the best business in the Premier League in the summer?
Pound for pound, probably, yeah. I think that probably is fair. I mean, I'm sort of aware that the graph does that, doesn't it? That you know, the difference between a 30 million and 40 million pound signing is much smaller than the difference between, say, a 60 million and 80 million pound signing. So I think Chelsea also had a great window in a very different way. But yeah, Tottenham, for relatively limited funds, and we know that their finances are not great at the moment. They've had to take out an emergency loan, and that they've really been hammered by the fact they can't get fans into the stadium, which was supposed to be a revenue generator. So bearing that in mind, I think they've done a great job of plugging the holes that were there, while offloading some of the players they needed to offload who are on big wages. So I think they both had good windows, just in very different ways. But yeah, Reguilon particularly, I think was a player they desperately needed, somebody who could get forward from left back, who could give a bit of support for Ben Davies, and I think one of the reasons Son has been so liberated this season is the sense of security of what's behind him.
Yeah, he's been very good. Reguilon, he's one of my favourite players to watch so far this season. Now, Martin, Chelsea and Tottenham, they both look like they're going to be in title contention come the end of the season. If you were to choose one that you think is better equipped to challenge for the title, not necessarily win it, but challenge for the Premier League this year, which one of the two teams would you pick?
This is difficult because I actually suggested that we pose this question and I still haven't come up with an answer. So it's really tough. I think it's the toss of a coin at the moment. It's very hard to tell. I think Tottenham, I would say probably I'd just give them the edge just because you're sort of more confident in the way that they're organised right now, that they're less a team of individuals. And I think Chelsea and Lampard has done very well to sort of knit that team together. And have the start that they had. But with Son and Kane, who are essentially unplayable at the moment, this is very much a Mourinho team where they've got these two players who just go out and they will win you the game if the support cast just do their jobs. And they're doing that. And like you say, the signings that they've made, Højbjerg in particular, but also Reguilon, who I've been super impressed with defensively, because I knew he was good going forwards. But I think the passion that he's shown as soon as he came into the club, his debut, he just looked so fired up. And that's really, really impressed me defensively. I think he's been really sound in the most part. And he does have that sort of Kyle Walker side where he's got that recovery pace to make up for any errors as well. So, yeah, I just think they've got the support cast there and the base to let Kane and Son flourish. And the big issue is the fitness of those two players. And obviously that is a very, very big issue if you look at... if you watched the documentary last season.
Yeah, very much so. What about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm essentially going to repeat what Martin's just said. That I think structurally I trust Tottenham more, but Chelsea squad is better. So Chelsea can lose half a dozen players and they'll still be able to put out a really, really good 11. If Tottenham lose Kane or Son, or Højbjerg maybe, then they are suddenly very diminished.
Yeah, I mean, my Mourinho loving is going to absolutely continue here, Jonathan. But do you think as well, as the season goes through and we get towards the back end of it, if Tottenham are up there, do you think Mourinho's experience of being in that situation with teams before, do you think that then comes to the fore?
Yeah, it probably does. I mean, what seems to me to have happened this season is that football's taken. I've written countless pieces saying football had passed Mourinho by, and I think all of those were true. But I think what's happened this season is because of circumstances, football's taken a step back. Okay. And that one of the reasons we saw all that wildness in the first sort of month and a half of the season was that the teams who were at the top, Liverpool and City particularly, what they were, they played a really high tempo game. So having to play 2 games a week eventually grinds them down. But actually more important is the organisation. That they didn't have a proper pre-season to get the basics of the organisation of pressing in place. And then both Klopp and Guardiola do very specific work for every game. Now, if you're playing a game every 3 days and your players are exhausted and they haven't had the proper pre-season, it's very hard to do that individual preparation for games. And so to give an example of what I mean by that, it's actually the season before last. There was a game between Liverpool and Huddersfield. I think it was on a Friday night. And Huddersfield kicked off and Liverpool's Naby Keita scored within, 7 or 8 seconds. And roughly the same time, like within a week of that, Shane Long scored, I think, the quickest ever Premier League goal for Southampton against... Can I remember who it was against?
Probably Villa, if it was Shane Long.
Yeah, he always scores against Villa, doesn't he?
I don't think it was Villa.
I remember the goal, but...
This is annoying. I thought that would be in my head as I started that sentence, and it turns out not to have been. Anyway, those 2 goals, they both came about by Liverpool and Southampton knew how the opposition would kick off. They knew exactly, okay, he kicks it to him, 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 then he plays it infield. And as he played that ball infield, bang, Shane Long or Naby Keita pounces, and suddenly they're 3-1 goal. Now, that's a very... Shane Long goal was against Watford.
You've done well to pull that back. Very well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely nothing to do with the producer typing it in the chat box. Definitely.
I didn't see it.
Definitely plucked from the back of my mind. But that's great producing. That's what we're coming here for.
Yeah, top notch.
That's a very simple example of how pressing works. You understand the patterns of the opponent, and from kickoff, it's from a very fixed starting point. But that's happening all the time. From every goal kick, every time the goalkeeper rolls out, every time the right back's got the ball in space, there'll be 2 or 3 moves that a team favours. If you know what those moves are, ideally you get players in the way to pick up the ball and create a chance. But if you don't, even if you just disrupt that rhythm, then you're breaking the sort of internal dynamic of that team. Now, if you can't put in place those plans, set those traps, set those ambushes, if you don't have time to do that and your players are too tired to do that and they can't take on board that volume of information that at such frequency, then clearly the way you've been winning games is going to be slightly changed. And I think that's why we saw Liverpool and City struggle a little bit in those first weeks of the season. So when that's not there, the games come back to a game we understood sort of 10 or 15 years ago when Mourinho was at his peak. So this is more a style of game that he understands, that he excels at. And I think the more football is a scrap, the more it's a battle of attrition, then the more the capacity to dig the best trench becomes the significant factor. And there's nobody better at digging trenches than Mourinho. He says, finally getting to the end of a very, very tortured analogy.
I mean, considering you didn't know that question was coming per se as well, I think it's a great answer and a great long answer as well. I also want to say that we probably shouldn't listen too much to what the producer says in the chat, because he has asked me to sort my hair out in there as well. So we shouldn't hold too much credence to what goes on in the chat. Now, WhoScored have obviously got all their fancy stuff that they do. They've come up with a top-rated 11 of Chelsea and Tottenham based on the season's ratings so far. And I believe that each player would have to have played at least 5 games, Martin. Is that correct? Because I've got this 11 in front of me here. And I'm aghast. I'm shocked by it. if I'm going to be honest.
Don't say that, Dan.
I don't know how you want us to go through this, Martin. I guess you're the boss in this situation. Do you want Jonathan to guess the 11, or do you want me to just go through it individually and then we'll talk about what changes Jonathan would make?
Yeah, I think we can go for it individually. There's definitely talking points in there. I think there are really interesting comparisons, particularly with, I think, Chilwell and Reguilon and Kante and Højbjerg, in terms of those sort of comparison being similar players and profiles. And someone's got to win, and one team has won quite handsomely.
Yeah, I'm absolutely shocked by the sheer volume of one team in here. So the goalkeeper is Mendy. I guess would that be expected, Jonathan? Mendy over Lloris?
I mean, that's a toss-up for me. I think, I would probably, if I were building a club, if I were building a team. Actually, I don't know. Do you go for Mendy because he's younger, or do you go for Lloris because he's got more credit in the bank? So look, I'm happy either way with the keeper, as long as it's not Kepa. I'm fine with that.
I mean, I think my average rating in goal for Chelsea might be higher than Kepa's, and I've played zero games for Chelsea so far this season. The back four is just pure Chelsea. It's Reece James, Thiago Silva, Kurt Zouma, and Ben Chilwell.
Yeah, again, I understand that, because I think Tottenham, they've had a lot of changes at centre back. I think Eric Dyer's had up games and down games. I think Davinson Sanchez, you'd say the same. Reguilon, I like a lot, but equally Chilwell, I think, has had a great season. And Reece James, I think, he could be one of those incredibly unlucky players who is outstanding in his position at a time when his country has another player who's just a little bit better. He could be the Stuart McGill to Shane Warne of English right backs. But everything I see of Reece James suggests to me he's a superb footballer.
Yeah, I actually think he'll be one that ends up getting in the England squad for the summer, and I think that'll be a surprise at a right back of someone being left out, because I feel like Reece James kind of does. He doesn't specialise in one aspect, but he does everything that you need from a fullback to a high standard, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also I'd be pretty confident in extremis with him playing on the right of a back three. So if it's two from him and Trippier and Alexander-Arnold, that's a really hard choice, because Gareth Southgate clearly really likes Trippier, and also Trippier does give you the option he can play on the left. Yeah,
sure. I mean, to be fair, with Southgate as well, you could end up with 3 or 4 right backs in the squad, and it wouldn't be a surprise.
Kyle Walker will probably be in there as well, but for his capacity to play on the right of the back three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Anything you change in that back four, Martin?
Am I allowed to say yes? I don't think so. I think, like you say, Chilwell and Reguilon is probably the sort of the closest one, and it could go either way. So I think they've both been really impressive. But I think where Chilwell's got a couple of goals and assists already, I think he just sort of, that just weighs in his favour. He's only played 6 games, so he's got played less games to sort of bring that rating down as well, which needs to be considered. And based on this season, I think that's a fair assessment, personally.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think you can argue with that Chelsea back four being picked, looking at it and talking about the players individually as well. We move on to the midfield four now. So we've got Ziyech, Kante, Mount and Son as the 4 there. Thoughts on that, Jonathan?
So Ziyech, Kante, Mount and Son.
It's a very attacking team.
It's a 4-4-2.
Yes.
Yeah, always 4-4-2 on WhoScored, I think.
That's your first mistake. Yeah, I mean, okay, let's start at the back of that with Kante or Højbjerg. I think I'd probably have gone for Højbjerg, but Kante has had the last 3 games has been exceptional and looks much more comfortable back in that role. I never quite understood that idea of trying to make him more of a box-to-box player. I know he's had a lot of issues off the field with legal cases to do with his agent and image rights in France. And I think there certainly was a feeling last season that was affecting him, which is, I never know how much to read into that. I never know quite how much players can isolate themselves from that. So, yeah, I'd probably have gone Højbjerg, but again, Kante, I can't really criticise. Son, absolutely, but I wouldn't have him in a 4-4-2 at all. I think he needs to be much closer to Kane. Mason Mount, I increasingly impressed by him every time I see him. I think he's a enormously gifted footballer technically, but also tactically. And so the fact he can play as a creative midfielder or as a deep lying midfielder, I think that's says a lot about his character and about his understanding of the game. And I think his assist for the Hudson-Odoi goal against Rennes on Tuesday, I think that shows his intelligence, his pass selection. Because when he got that ball, he knew where Tammy Abraham was as a centre forward. He must have been able to see Werner already sprinting straight ahead of him. And in a sense, that's the easy ball. Just knock it over the top.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He checks himself. He knows he's got the time to have a look and have a think. And then he sees Hudson-Odoi making the run. And because he's hitting that ball slightly on the diagonal, right-footed, it bends into his path. So it is the least obvious of the three passes, but probably the right one. And then he plays it perfectly as well. So I think Mason Mount is I know there's all that slightly farcical debate about him or Grealish as if they're somehow competing for a place. They're just very, very different players. And Mount maybe is somebody who is less eye-catching. It's less easy to make some kind of nice 30-second clip of videos of him. But I think he's a sensational player. So I would have no qualms about having him in there. And then Ziyech was the other one, was he? Did you say?
Ziyech on the right, yeah.
I mean, look, he started incredibly well. I have to say, I didn't realise he'd played as many as 5 games yet. But
he's exactly 5.
He settled very, very quickly. I was sort of thinking, what's the alternative as a wide player from Spurs? And Bale hasn't really done enough yet. Bergwijn's been in and out. Lucas Moura's been in and out. So I guess almost by default, because of the system that's been picked, it's him. If you played a 4-3-3 and someone was playing high, then obviously people like Ndombele, Sissoko come into the equation, but we're not, so they don't.
It's not the tactical team that I would pick either. I think the main consideration for us would have been, well, we always, our sort of format is 4-4-2, and that's just on the basis of it's a statistical calculation. We can't be going through every game and picking out different formations, and anyway, that's another debate that we get plenty of stick for, so don't worry about that. But I think what you're looking at is probably the tactical choice, the tactical change would be Højbjerg coming in alongside Kante and Mount in the 3, and then Werner would have to drop out for Højbjerg, which I think is perfectly arguable.
I mean, you've given away the team, eh?
Yeah, in terms of
Jonathan didn't know that.
Werner's rating, he's there, and I guess his strike partner is not hard to guess at all.
Yeah. Do you want to have a go at guessing, Jonathan, who the striking Werner might be?
Is it Olivier Giroud?
I don't think he played the 5 games.
That's the only reason. That's the only reason.
I will go for Harry Kane then.
Yeah, I mean, spot on. I mean, he's got the highest rating of everyone in this team as well. He's the only one actually in the 8.28 is Harry Kane's overall rating.
Yeah, that's very rare, I should say. Very rare to be in the 8s. Yeah. I just think his numbers this season are remarkable, really, for a striker. Just based on, he's always been a good hold-up striker, and his passing's probably been underrated for some time now. But if you look at his volume of assists, it's not just the number. It's not like some of the assists have come off his backside and landed to Son, who's just taken the chance. The vast majority have been really exceptional assists, like perfectly weighted passes.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the element of his game that has sort of stepped up statistically this season in terms of translating into assists. And I think if you look at his 9 games, 9 assists in the Premier League, to have 9 assists at this stage for a striker is incredible. For a striker that only managed 9 assists over the previous 3 seasons combined, which is around 100 games, to have done that in 9 is unheard of. So he's the form player in the Premier League. He's been the best player in the Premier League, I'd say, by a distance this season. Just in terms of the consistency in the game against Man City, really solidified that in terms of the shift that he put in. And obviously there was a lot of sort of worthy applause for his shift and the defensive work and the selflessness, and that's what you get from Harry Kane, and that's why Tottenham have a chance this season.
Jonathan, I'm going to hark back to Mourinho. You'll be absolutely shocked to learn, but how much credit does he take for the evolution in Harry Kane's game this season, or do you not see it as an evolution?
No, it is an evolution. He is clearly dropped. I think we've been aware he had the potential to do that, but I think the feeling until this season was, what's the point? How does he gain by that? But that relationship, and it began last season, to be fair. If you think of the Leicester game last season, we when Leicester sort of got caught out by playing a high line with Wes Morgan in the middle of it, after Wes Morgan hadn't played for several months. But you saw it there, how the two could combine. And I think this again is where you see Mourinho's change slightly. That I think he went through a spell of being sort of almost ideologically nihilistic, that he just didn't want the ball, that the ball was sort of a toxic thing that Guardiola and all those sophisticates had, and Mourinho didn't want that. He wanted to be the rebel who did it without the ball. And now I think he's just gone back to being the pragmatist he was when he was at Porto, when he was at Chelsea first time around, when he was at Inter, where he thinks, this works, let's just do this. and so I've got no idea whether he's sort of explained this to Kane and Son with the pepper pots on the table in the canteen, or whether it's just something that's happened naturally. He's gone, yeah, that's fine. But either way, he's the manager. He's letting it happen. So he has to take some credit for it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a joy to watch, to be fair. Another player with a good weight of pass, and we've spoke about Mount and Kane now, that their weight of pass has been absolutely sensational. We're going to move on now to Arsenal v Wolves, another big game in this round of fixtures. And Martin, what are Arsenal? What is their level? Are they about where they should be, really? What are they doing?
I think it's really tough, and I think that's why this run of games that they've sort of already started, obviously starting before the break against Villa, then Leeds, and now Wolves, is a run of games against three teams that I think most people would predict to finish around mid-table. So the fact that Arsenal are there currently, and obviously they've been outplayed in the two games to now, it really will be a concern to Arsenal fans to see their level compared against those sort of teams. And I think Wolves will be another sort of case in point of that. I think I look back at the game against Villa, and I went into the game as a fan, just not being scared of Arsenal at all. And I don't think there's any team in the league that fears Arsenal now. If anything, and I don't mean this based on the fact that they're one of the worst teams in the league at all, which clearly is not the case. But if anything, I think they're one of the more favourable fixtures right now, just because they're that name where you come away and a team like Villa beats them 3-0 and that's considered a scalp. How much longer that will be considered a big scalp, the 3-0 obviously, but a win against Arsenal is considered a scalp, I think is up for debate. Just because I think there's a lot of teams that will fancy playing Arsenal now, just for a morale boost. If they do win, they're not expected to win, but if they do, they know they can. And I think it's a really nice fixture for Wolves this weekend, and obviously Arsenal really need a result and a performance to turn their sort of rut around.
Yeah, Jonathan, it felt like when Arteta came in last season, he made them a bit more streetwise. They're a bit more difficult to beat, but they kind of reverted back to what they were before. Arteta now, as Martin says, they feel easy to take on again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Villa game is the big concern, because they had those, particularly in the FA Cup, they had those good results towards the end of last season, where against big teams, I mean, they got the result against Liverpool in the league. Okay, a Liverpool team that had already won the league. They got the result against City in the semi-final of the cup, and then against Chelsea in the cup final. And they sort of looked very comfortable, sitting deep, very confident on the ball, playing out from the back, and they were able to use that to sort of manipulate the opposition and then create space to hit Aubameyang particularly. And then the sort of a creative edge they had with that seems to have deserted them in the last month or so. I mean, they've got one goal in the last 5 league games, which is
something like that. Yeah.
I mean, clearly that's not enough. No. Very obviously, 0.2 goals per game is not adequate. So I think we're still in the period of thinking Arteta has arrived with a vision, with a plan. I think that Villa game aside, you have been able to see what that plan is. You've been able to see that they have been stronger defensively and a bit less flaky. But the cost of not being able to score with that is too great. And what really fascinated me about that Leeds game, and something I didn't quite understand, was Leeds have been really vulnerable against Leicester, against Palace, down their right-hand side, that Luke Ayling, Helder Costa axis down the right. Now, Helder Costa wasn't playing, so Rafinha had come in. So maybe that makes things a bit different. But you would think that Aubameyang, to exploit that weak right side, would be the play there, but he played in the middle. And so I know there's been this clamour for him to play through the middle, and I do sort of semi-understand that. But in that particular game, I'd have thought him playing down the left was the thing to do. And my whole sort of build-up to that game was thinking, I think Leeds are going to get done down the left here. I think they're going to Arsenal are going to draw Leeds onto them, and they're going to play that long diagonal we've seen again and again for Aubameyang, and Ayling's going to get caught out. But they couldn't do it because Aubameyang wasn't there. He was in the middle. And that, I don't want to say concerned me, because I'm sure Arteta knows what he's doing, but I didn't understand it. And it's one of the first things with Arteta I haven't really been able to see what he was trying to do. So yeah, I think we're entering a critical phase for Arteta, that if this doesn't improve the next month or so, I think that initial wave of goodwill that he had will start to dissipate.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose at least coming away from the last game, Arsenal can point to a clean sheet, which feels a little bit of progress in some minute ways. Let's move on to Wolves now and how you think they might approach the game, Jonathan, because something rare happened on Monday night. I think it's the first time since they've been in the Premier League, might even have been the first time since Nuno came in. They didn't play three at the back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was specifically because Conor Cody was unavailable because of his positive COVID test, and he will be back. So I would be surprised if they don't play with the back three. But having said that, they had far more shots than they normally have. I think I'm right in saying that every outfield player, apart from Ruben Neves, had a shot for Wolves in that game. And also, I think, was it Neto who came on for Ruben Neves? And he did have a shot. So in a sense, each of the positions has had a shot, which suggests an openness and a sort of all-round attacking game, which maybe Wolves haven't often had. So I guess for Nuno, it's nice to know he has that option there if he does want to be more attacking. But I think Conor Cody is enormous for them, and I would assume he'll slot straight back in the middle of that back three for this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive statement and a massive show of love isn't the right word, but it's the only word I can come up with at the moment, to Conor Cody, and the fact that he misses a game. Again, I think it might be the first game he's missed since they've been promoted, and they don't want to play their normal formation just because he's not there. Martin, that's a massive statement of just how good Conor Cody is.
I think it's a statement in that I don't think Conor Cody can work in a back four either. I think that's an issue that England will need to consider over the summer. I just think he needs that time on the ball to pick those parts. That's his game, and he needs to be as uninvolved as possible, basically, to be able to steer everyone else about. Basically, everyone talks about how vocal he is on the pitch, and you can do that when you're not that troubled yourself. And I think that's why he's so important to this Wolves team. And just on Wolves, in terms of, obviously Nuno's so set in his tactics usually, and he's so confident in his team. That I find them such an interesting team in that they're so happy to play within themselves for large portions of the game, primarily the first half. I think they conserve energy where others don't, knowing that they're fitter than the vast majority, maybe with the exception of Leeds, and that they will come into the second half stronger, and they will invariably score in the second half. I think they've only scored in the first half of one of their last 8 or 9 games, and that's been a theme throughout their time in the Premier League, and I think into the Championship as well. And it's not uncommon for teams to score more goals in the second half, but the sort of the proportion of Wolves' goals that come in the second half is alarming. And I think that's exactly what they'll do against Arsenal. They'll sit within themselves. They'll play very comfortably within their shape, and they'll wait for Arsenal to get tired and then bang. And I think that's why Wolves will probably do the exact same, a sort of rinse repeat of their usual sort of 1-0, if not 1-1 scoreline.
No, I mean, I actually think Wolves will go there and pick up 3 points, if I'm being perfectly honest. But following on from what Martin said, Jonathan, with Wolves, they can be quite tedious to watch at times, but there's absolutely no denying that they've been a massive asset to the Premier League since they've been promoted, and the job that Nuno's done there has been sensational.
Oh, it has completely. I mean, I know what you mean by tedious, that they sometimes don't score many goals, not many goal-mouth incidents. But I think just looking at the structure of that team, how well organised they are, I think there's something very, very impressive about that. And I think even they're not often involved in scrappy games. They can be involved in games where there's not much goal-mouth action. But I always find watching Wolves, there's always a sense that this is actually good football. That there's a plan and a purpose there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, bang on, really. With your synopsis of Wolves, I don't have anything to add. Now, we did say at the top of the programme that we were going to preview every Premier League game, which does bring us on to our next segment called Just a Minute, where Martin and Jonathan take turns to try and preview each of the remaining matches in a minute each, or as close as possible. It's at your discretion, although I'm looking more at you here, Martin. If I don't like it, it's been a minute, I'll probably cut you off. So, Martin, we'll start with you then. Crystal Palace, Newcastle. Your minute starts now.
Okay, so obviously the Friday night game. I think this is a battle of two teams who doesn't want the ball more than the other team. Only Sheffield United have had less possession than the two, and obviously they come into this game off the back of disappointing defeats. Newcastle were obviously expected to lose against Chelsea, but I think that, like I said earlier, the manner of that defeat understandably upset the Newcastle fans to the extent that in the first half, their outfield 10 players completed as many passes, or only 2 more passes than Kurt Zuma on his own. So it was really hard to watch for them, and pretty shocking, really, until you sort of look at the manager. But then Palace, by comparison, they would have considered themselves unlucky to lose to Burnley. Nick Pope won our Man of the Match award in that game with 5 saves, and I think they'll continue to be without Will Zaha, which is obviously a massive blow. And they've lost over 60% of the league matches that he's not started since they were promoted back in 2014. Preview over.
Absolute. First off, I'll say I do not envy you two at all having to do that. This is an absolutely horrible task. But Martin, it was your idea, so it kind of is what it is. And secondly, I completely failed on the timing aspect because I didn't look at what time you started talking, so I didn't have any clue of how long you'd been going. So, Jonathan, we'll move on to you now. Brighton v Liverpool. Shoot.
Well, Liverpool's defeat to Atlanta on Wednesday, I think, was a bit of a surprise. I mean, obviously, it was a much changed team, partly because this is the lunchtime kickoff on Saturday, and Klopp's already spoken about the problems of preparing teams when you play in year for that early kickoff on a Saturday. But before that Atlanta game, they had gone 8 unbeaten. The problems they'd had earlier in the season defensively seemed to have been resolved. So even with the 2 conceded against Atlanta, they've let in 5 in the 8 games since Van Dijk was injured. Now, that's not suggesting they're better without Van Dijk. I think they have refocused. They are very effective defensively now. Brighton have been a slightly strange side, I think. I think they played much better than the results suggest. Yeah, they hadn't won in 7 before they beat Villa last week, which was a really good game, really open game, could have gone either way. So they got the breaks in that one. Last season, this game, Brighton got done playing out from back twice in the first 8 minutes, and Liverpool caught them with that high press. So I think this is a test both of how Liverpool press and whether that's as effective as it was last season, and also of whether Brighton have learned any lessons on how they can do that more effectively.
That wasn't far bang up a minute. I did remember to time it in my head this time. So, Martin, on to you now. Man City v Burnley. I
think if recent history is anything to go by, then between these two teams, then Burnley will be obviously brought back down to earth with a bump. I think the last 3 home games between these teams at the Etihad have all ended 5-0 to Man City, which is a remarkable consistency of scoreline. So a lot of people will be packing their fantasy teams with City forwards this weekend. That said, I do think Burnley will be lifted from their first win of the season. And Sean Dyche's side are used to this position where they go through bad results and people write them off, and then they sort of manage to rally themselves. And I think this could be one of those games where they're able to do that and climb the table. I'm not sure they'll win. I'm not sure they'll get a result, but I don't think this will be another rout. I think City haven't scored more than once in a league game since September, which is incredible for their sort of all of their attacking talents. And they've actually netted fewer goals than Palace, Brighton and West Ham this season. So I don't think this will be the glut of goals that it usually is.
You've come up with some absolute excellent strategies there, stuff that I didn't have
I definitely didn't research that ahead of time.
I'm shocked by a couple of things you've just said about Man City there in terms of the teams that have scored more than them. I find that absolutely incredible. So well done to you there, Martin. Jonathan, now Everton versus Leeds.
Well, Leeds arrived with this great reputation. A lot of people were very excited to see them under Bielsa. They did have that very good start to the season. I think they got a little bit lucky in a couple of those games early on. And I think there's been that sort of reset in those 3 defeats against Wolves, against Leicester, against Palace. All 3 of those games significant in that Leeds' opposition have between 32 and 35% of the ball. They don't like it when the opposition sit off them. Leeds need space to attack into. Now, I think Everton have had 51% possession over the season. I don't think they're a team naturally equipped to sit deep. I think that Leeds right side of Ayling and Helder Costa become a problem. Rafinha coming in may solve that, but Richarlison could benefit from that. I think the problem Everton have had is twofold. One is that Hammers has become a bit of a problem, that he doesn't run very much. He is very creative, but he doesn't give you much defensive work. And when Seamus Coleman is out, as he has been, and as I think he will be for this game, he doesn't really have that backup behind him. So two flawed teams who are both very good going forward.
Well done again. I mean, I just want to thank you there, because you've given me a little fantasy football nudge that I wanted to put Richarlison in my fantasy football team, and your validation of that, I think, from talking there, I'm going to make sure I do that.
I think on that game, Dan, on that game, there's a nice nugget in that the last time they met in the Premier League, was a 1-1 draw, and the goal scorers were James Milner and Wayne Rooney 16 years ago. Yeah, so wow. I looked that up, but yeah, not my game. Sorry, not my game.
Just showing off. Get him on.
Well, he was showing off a little there, a bit of showboating from Martin, but he's going to be getting brought down to earth now, big time, with West Brom v Sheffield United.
Yeah, so a basement battle in game week 10. I think we can expect the first mention of a relegation 6-pointer this weekend, assuming I haven't missed one already. Without a win between them, the magnitude of this game certainly can't be underestimated, even if it's not likely to attract the neutrals, like you say. I think we may well see a start for Callum Robinson against his former club. He's the only West Brom player to score more than once this season, and he nearly added to that against Man United. And obviously a game that I feel like they can take a lot of heart from, and feel very aggrieved that the two decisions at both ends in terms of both penalties went against them massively. I thought they were both sort of terrible decisions. Sheffield United have only picked up 1 point from 9 games this season, but stretching back 3 games last season as well. That's 1 point from 12 games. And the absence of Jack O'Connell has really cost them, I think, in costing them that balance and stability that he brought to the defence. And so a combination of their overlapping centre-backs being found out perhaps a little bit, but also not being at full strength, has really cost them at both ends of the pitch.
Safe to say, if we were still doing pay-per-view, this would probably be a pay-per-view game, and it probably wouldn't draw much interest. West Brom, Sheffield United, so well done to you there, Martin. Jonathan, back to you now. Southampton against Manchester United.
Well, Southampton, I think, have been brilliant this season, and really since the 9-0 defeat to Leicester, they've gone from strength to strength. And great credit to them for sticking with Ralph Hasenhüttl and sticking with his plans and what he's been doing. They're unbeaten in the last 7. No Danny Ings and no Nathan Redmond's obviously an issue for them going forward, although Theo Walcott stepped up and got the goal on Monday. However, having said that, I think United are much better against teams who come to them. They're better when they sit deep and they can hit the space behind them. That's why their away record is much better this season. They've won their last 3 away games. It's why when they get an early goal, as he did against Besiktas here on Tuesday, they can then dominate, because the opposition then has to come at them. And 3 previous meetings between Solskjaer and Hasenhüttl, United have won 1 and there's been 2 draws. Bruno Fernandez obviously is in great form, but there are issues in defence with Lindelof and Wan-Bissaka both being doubts.
Excellent stuff, excellent research there. And Martin, your last one, Leicester against Fulham.
I think this is the early kickoff on Monday evening, and those games haven't really been ones to tune into so far from what I can remember. But this should be quite tempting to watch and should be an entertaining game. Both teams have scored in the last 6 meetings between the teams, which is a run that stretches back to 2007 now. Leicester will be looking to bounce back, obviously, from the disappointing performance against Liverpool. And as I said earlier, they could be welcoming back some key players in Pereira and Didi and Castagna. They're all nearing match fitness, and they represent big upgrades on their understudies, who, in fairness to them, deserve great credit for holding the fort. But I think Leicester could move on to another level now. After a woeful start to the season, I think Fulham have shown some fight of late, at least, even if they continue to be this sort of architects of their own downfall. So I can see that run of goals at both ends continuing. The Cottagers are certainly fun to watch and do have individual quality in their team. They're just organisationally, these are massive issues. The individual quality point is highlighted by the fact that they've completed more dribbles than any team in Europe, which is quite remarkable given their standing. Obviously, dribbles don't win games, and Fulham fans would wish they did. But Anguissa and Lookman have been exciting to watch, at least.
Yeah, I think Fulham fans would be wishing that missed penalties won games as well, having some trouble from 12 yards at the moment. Final one then, Jonathan, the big one, West Ham v Villa.
I mean, Villa have obviously had some absolutely extraordinary, outstanding results this season. Notably the victories over Liverpool and against Arsenal. both of those are able, and I feel this is a thing I keep coming back to, they've been able to exploit space behind an opponent coming onto them. In Arsenal's case, because they were forced to. In Liverpool's case, because that's a natural game. But they have lost 3 of the last 4, which I think has brought a bit of narrative back. Though they played well enough against Brighton and could easily have won that. That was a very open game, very entertaining game. I think the loss of Ross Barkley in that game, though, is costly. It does deny that Barkley-Grealish axis has been so impressive through midfield. West Ham will probably sit quite deep. That's the way David Moyes plays. There won't be that space to attack. They've only lost 1 of the last 7, but they've only scored 1 goal in each of the last 4 games. So they're perhaps missing Mikel Antonio up front, and Yarmolenko is probably going to be out as well. So lacking a little bit of creativity.
Excellent stuff. Well done, guys. I mean, as I say, I don't envy that task at all. I hope I never get asked to do that on this podcast, because I don't fancy that at all. But yes, some really great points there. And that means that we have gone through every Premier League game and previewed it for game week 10. So that's excellent, and hopefully sets the podcast apart. We're going to finish now with our form guide segment. And Martin, this is actually sponsored by Footstock. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about them and what they do?
Yeah, it's a really fun platform where essentially it's a mixture of fantasy football contests that are judged on real life performances, but also like player trading. So you buy and trade player cards essentially with other players on the game. And then you use those players to build a portfolio and enter those players into fantasy football tournaments for real cash. So it is fun. It's very unique and well worth looking over.
Yeah, and thank you to Footstock for sponsoring this segment. So I'm just looking at essentially the power rankings, aren't they, Martin? Here, the top 10 in the Who Scored power rankings in the Premier League. A couple of players we just wanted to highlight in there. And Jonathan, I'll start with you. In at number 6, it's Dominick Calvert-Lewin, who literally cannot stop scoring at the moment. Just what has Ancelotti done for him, and what improvements in his game have you liked?
Well, he's one of those players who, whenever I saw him, he always looked quite good. And I never quite understood why Everton fans were so frustrated by him. But he tended to play on the left, which maybe didn't get the best out of him. I think what Ancelotti's done is essentially tell him to stand in the box. And he told him to be more like Inzaghi, which is probably physically very, very different. But Calvert-Lewin's clearly benefited from that. He looks a really confident player. But he's not just a finisher. He has that strength. He's good with his back to goal. He's if Kane is injured for England, then Calvert-Lewin looks a very, very, well, slightly different, a very, very decent backup.
Yeah, I think he's elevated himself to being the number one choice if Kane would be out for England. And Martin, just what has impressed you about Calvert-Lewin? I look at his build-up play now. His one-touch link-up play is something that I think's really come on over the last few months. What have you liked from him?
Yeah, I agree with Jonathan in that he's always had a set of skills that sort of set him apart as quite a unique player. He's really strong, really fast, good in the air, and his work rate is exceptional. But obviously, he's doing a lot more of that work in the box now, as you say, and his aerial ability is pretty much second to none right now. So he's such a target, and when you've got players like Luca Dean who put in the delivery that he does, he's become more of a weapon just by repositioning himself on the pitch, really. So yeah, he was the first player to reach 10 goals in the Premier League last weekend. He's only the fourth player to do it in Europe's top 5 leagues, alongside Lewandowski, Haaland, and a 39-year-old Zlatan Ibrahimovic. So yeah, really impressive company, and based on his sort of scoring stats, sort of certainly ahead of last season, you'd never have predicted it. So he's in great confidence and a real asset to both club and country for sure.
Yeah, Martin, while we're on you, we've got Bruno Fernandez sitting in number 2. Mm-hmm. In some way, I'm surprised he's that high, but in other ways, I'm not. What is it that's elevated him to number 2 on this list behind Harry Kane?
I think there's a big debate, certainly on social media, the Bruno Fernandez, and obviously the last goal that he did score was a penalty, another one. And Manchester United get an incredible amount of penalties, and he scores most of them. Obviously, the one at the weekend was at the second attempt, but in scoring that penalty, he's moved into the top 30 penalty scorers since we got data from Opta in 2009. So over 11 years, he's already in the top 30. He's already second for Manchester United in that time, behind Wayne Rooney. So it is remarkable the amount of penalties that he scores, but he deserves a great deal of credit. Look, he's had a direct hand in 34 goals in 35 games across all competitions for Man United. And he is a midfielder. He does play number 10 a lot of the time, but he hasn't always, and he has played deeper in the midfield at times. So those numbers are remarkable. And he's just one of those players where he can do things that no one else sees other than sort of De Bruyne, who I would say is still sort of levels above. But he's also in the same vein. He has those moments where he sees things that other people can't because they simply aren't there, and he just passes to space. And his lowlights reels are quite enjoyable, but his highlights reels are equally enjoyable and more impressive, obviously. And he deserves credit. He's not just a penalty scorer. He's excellent over set pieces as well, obviously. But his vision's superb. His work rate's superb. I think is an important case to make. Just in those sort of players can be seen as luxury, and Bruno Fernandez is certainly not a luxury. He puts in a shift. He's always in the referee's ear. He gets a lot of decisions like he did at the weekend. But a great player, great addition to the league, and Manchester United's most important player by an absolute mile.
Sure. Jonathan, you got anything to add on Fernandez?
No, I mean, that pretty much sums it up. I think when United are faced with a packed defence, he is the one player who can break it down. Yeah, he's the one with the creativity. He's the one with the spatial awareness, and I think he does have that intelligence that he's comfortable playing deep if he needs to. So in a midfield three, I think he's a hugely valuable player to have.
Yep, excellent. No surprise at all to see Harry Kane sitting at number one, but we've already given him plenty of praise in this podcast, so we won't go on to that. Again, should mention at this point that there is a chance for WhoScored.com users to actually create a WhoScored account up until Monday at midnight, can enter into a draw to win one of 100 free download codes for Football Manager 21. So also worth saying, you must opt in to receive emails so that we can contact you if you do win. So 100 codes, that's a lot of codes. So you enter, you've probably got a decent chance of winning. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough codes to give any presenters one, so I've had to pay for the game, and my Burnley revolution has begun in earnest. So yeah, sign up to WhoScored, create yourself a free account, opt in, and you've got a chance of winning FM21. Just to finish, Jonathan, I don't know if you've even remembered or how much time you've spent thinking about the teaser that we asked you at the start of the podcast. So have you got a couple of answers for us?
Okay, so of players who are currently at those clubs, is it Harry Kane?
No.
No?
Oh, no, it's not.
Oh, what a disaster.
I wouldn't give you one that easy, Jonathan. I think this is league goals only, and the correct answer, as Dan actually got in our sort of meeting ahead of the pod, I was quite surprised that he got it. No offence, Dan.
I'm taken.
It's Dele Alli. He scored 5 goals in Premier League fixtures against Chelsea, so he got a couple of braces in that time. So yeah, it's Dele Alli ahead of Kane, who's got 4.
And then all time in the Premier League.
Yeah.
I'm sort of thinking it's got to be a Chelsea player.
Correct.
I'll give you that. Yeah, correct.
Well, it could have been something like Robbie Keane, who was at Tottenham for a long time. But so a Chelsea player who was there for a long time. Drogba?
No, that would have been who I would have guessed, but it isn't Drogba.
So there's only one player who's got more than Frank Lampard out of interest. Lampard's got 6. This player's got 10.
10.
So a lot. He did score a hat-trick in one game, and I think he got 2 in another. But yeah, it surprised me when I was researching it.
Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank.
Correct.
Yes.
Very good.
Well done.
Redeem some honour.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got to be honest, Jonathan. I expected you to get both, so I'm a little bit disappointed.
I'm very tired.
Yeah, that's true. You did have that caveat at the start, but yeah, we'll probably do that feature every week.
I'll be exposed the fraud.
yeah. Unless you get it wrong again next week, in which case we'll never do it again. So all that's left to do is to thank you both for joining me. It's been a really enjoyable first podcast, and hopefully listeners and watchers of video as well will enjoy it. So cheers, guys, and enjoy watching the football at the weekend.